So here we are in Photoshop CS4. I took my sketch from Masters of Chicken Scratch Volume 1 and decided to finish it up, partly because I built a fifth scale model from this sketch and just felt that it needed to be finished. So I took it. You can also see part of the finished image in the book, but I left it unfinished on purpose so that people would come and check out the DVD. So I'm just adjusting my layers here. I got different layers, partly just because I put a like kind of an old paper background just to give it some tone to start with, kind of give it a nostalgic look, and then also kind of made the sketch brown. So right here I start with just using the regular round brush in Photoshop, and it has some transparency to it, and it kind of builds up color as you keep going over it. I've tended to really use this brush a lot. I think partly because I've been traditionally trained from Art Center, and I'm used to using markers. And when you use markers, you had to build it up with several layers to get the color built up. And for some reason, I've just always worked that way, even continually doing it on the digital side of stuff. There's so many different ways that you can actually color an object. One being this way, where I'm kind of just freehanding everything and laying in the color. And I tend to do that. There's several reasons why. One is that I like my stuff to kind of have the hand look to to the final piece, where it doesn't look like it was digitally done, where all the angles and the curves are exactly perfect. Sometimes you need to do that, and I understand that, but I think for when I'm thinking about stuff, I like to still leave stuff loose. And I think it's also kind of therapeutic to just sit there and color like that, um, just to fill in the different areas, kind of figuring out where colors are going. It kind of lets my mind think about the process and where I want to put stuff instead of doing everything with a path and laying it down real quick. Um, I'm kind of thinking the same time as I'm coloring too, coloring or rendering, I should say. But right now I'm on a layer underneath the sketch so I don't ruin my line work for now, because I want to see that line work to see where all the surfaces are and everything. This is a method that I like to use in Photoshop, where I take the hard round brush and fill in the wheels really quick. This is a You just make the circle really large and just fill it in, and it gives you a nice perfect circle that way without having to put down guides for yourself, especially on the side view. Now when I go down to the 3/4 view, you'll see how I have to use the ellipse guides in Photoshop, where I put the paths down to fill out the wheels. So yeah, just putting in my dark areas, my light areas. One of the things I tend to do too is I put down medium color first. I know some people work from dark to light, others work from light to dark. I tend to work from medium, and I work both ways, where I'm working light. Sometimes I'm working light to dark, and other times I'm working dark to light. So my colors tend to be really muted when I first lay them down. And I do that too. Like I said, I think it really does help me think about my process. If you lay down a dark color and you decide an area needs to be, kind of a mid-tone more, you have to go in and adjust levels and things like that to really get it to read right, or you have to render over the whole thing. So I tend to render with medium colors. That way I can take the color either way. I can either take it to a brighter uh, level, or I can take it to a darker level. And it just makes me feel more confident that way when I render stuff. But as I'm going along here, sometimes I'm still designing while I'm still rendering, especially when you start getting the forms going and start seeing how shapes really are basically going with each other. Do they look good? Does something need to be moved? But when you start building mass on an object, you really start looking at it a little differently than just your sketch. Because I think when you're just in sketch form, your mind tends to fill in the gaps, and I think that's partly why I love sketches. When I see sketches from other people, is that you fill in the gaps for them. So here's this is the fifth scale model I built. It's also in the book in volume 2 that you guys have, especially if you're watching this video. And I'm just taking a look at it to see how I finished off some areas. As you can see, it's changed a little bit from my sketch, and a lot of that, like I said, even has to do with when you get in 3D form, you realize that, oh, this area is not going to work, or this line would look better if it was like this, or change a few things around. Now I'm actually going over the top of my line work and erasing things and cleaning up a little bit of my areas here. This is the beauty about working digitally, is that you can erase your sketch and redo lines as necessary. Whereas if you're working on a traditional sketch, you might have to retrace it on a tracing paper. You can erase it, but after a while you can only erase so much. So here I've kind of got my midtones down, and now I'm starting to lighten up that surface. And the colors I use here are kind of like a warm metal tone. I'm thinking of, World War II aircraft while I'm rendering this thing, as if this thing was built from old airplane parts and old hot rod parts. Anything. This whole design is kind of based on existing and past technology, so it can be built today, and it's not way in the future, and it's not also it's not based on any scientific technology or anything like that. It's a standard gasoline engine, possible diesel, and then shaping some metal using old parts and assembling the thing. So I make the form fairly simple, and I have that break right here in the middle. So I know that car turns under right there. So I start filling out basically the core. See, I was looking at it there in my model. You can even see it in the photo where that breaks. It's a break line in the body. So anything underneath that's going to be a little darker, and then anything above that will be lighter. And you can tell that I rendered basically right after that break line, you have the darkest spot, and that's basically your core, and it's the horizon line that would fall right on that. And it gets darker and then kind of fades to lighter as the ground gets, or as it gets closer to the ground, because it's reflecting the ground. So right here I'm putting some hot spots and starting to figure out the actual body form, and really seeing how it's lining up, and how other things are looking with it. And just to let you know, this is slightly sped up too. It's about probably about double the amount of time it took me. This actual rendering, by the time I'm done, took about an hour, and that's a little long of a demo to make you guys suffer through that. You get the point from watching me. So right there, I drew a circle and put it behind my other wheel. Right here, I'm moving my stuff around a little bit. Just getting a sense of scale and stuff. then I take the black behind the wheel and place it on there to get the other side of the other wheel on the other side of the car. Then I decided to take out those shocks that were standing above the wheel. It was kind of a funky setup, you know. In reality, it was mechanically cool looking for the actual, you know, sketch, but when it came down to it for actual practicality for a real race car, you know, that would just be too much weight and too much mechanical stuff going on. So I ended up eliminating it. And I also don't have it on my Model 2. I think it looks more streamlined like that. But when I drew those shocks sticking up, I was thinking of, and also looking at airplane um, airplane pieces and stuff like the landing gear and how it comes down and all the different mechanisms going on there. So right here, I end up using the lasso tool on the windshield to fill it in really quick. And what this does is it gives me a quick, basically like a quick mask, so I can fill in the areas without going over the top of the other stuff. And I want to give it this kind of gold look to it, kind of like you know, sunglasses and stuff when they have that reflective material on them. And also just kind of taking some cues from old or from jet aircraft, current jet aircraft and things like that, canopies and such. So anyways, while I'm rendering this thing, you can kind of see it's starting to take form here. Again, using the whole core and the horizon line. So I'll go into more explanation as far as the horizon line and how to render certain objects later on when I do a tutorial on that on the CD. But basically, it's following the same rules as the body is, where you start from the sky is always light to dark, because as the horizon or as the sky goes up further and further into space, you get a darker blue, and then as you get down more towards the horizon, that's where your sunlight is, and also the atmosphere too, which bounces off a lot of light into the sky, and that creates a brighter spot on the horizon. And then from the horizon to the ground closest to you, again, it goes from dark to light. So from the top of the sky down to the horizon, it goes from dark to light. Then when it hits the horizon, it starts again. The ground line starts dark and then dark to light again. And that just really helps you learn how to render forms. And when you break a lot of things down into cylinders and cubes and cones and pyramids and things like that, you learn how to render form on all kinds of objects. And that really is the key to a successful rendering, is knowing where your lighting's coming from and where your you know, where your shadows are hitting. That's how you get your object to read. And it's also a lot of experience as well, you know, observing things, looking at vehicles, looking at reflections, seeing how they go over certain areas. Here I'm just cleaning up the window, making the guidelines a little, or the canopy lines a little cleaner. I'm putting a little edge on the canopy, because where that is, that would be like a metal strips over the top of a plastic canopy. So then those would be riveted on there. So you'd have a slight edge where that canopy is. And it's all based on, you know, kind of old World War II cockpits and things like that. Not really the modern day one, the way it's assembled. So you can really tell that it's starting to take form here. starting to get away from the line drawing. A lot's cleaned up. It's looking a little more aerodynamic, getting rid of a lot of the loose edges. Just adding some rivets in there right now, just to give it a better, looking at a lot of the material. And what I did there is I rendered those rivets on a separate layer, and then I went in with a brighter piece, or a brighter color, sorry, a brighter color on the rivets. And what that does is it makes it look like they're reflective. If you look at rivets on an airplane, they tend to have a different shine than the rest of the body. Because if it was the same, you wouldn't even notice the rivets. So they have a different, a little bit different texture to them. So they're going to shine a little bit different. So right here, I'm going over. I decided that I really needed to clean up the cockpit lines quite a bit to give them, to make it look like a man-made object. So one thing, when you go back over this stuff and you render man-made stuff, you want it to have a nice crisp edge. That's another big thing about man-made objects too, is that they need to have a crisp edge and not so much loose edges. It's kind of what I'm trying to say. So right now I'm also just kind of searching around looking for how that light's going to hit that canopy. Now I'm putting a highlight on the top of the edges on that, the edges of the basically the grid up there. I need to define the glass a little bit more the way it hits the sky, so I'm putting in some bright color up there. Then I decided to pull out the reference to some of the World War II planes that I have, and one is this P-51. That it's from a photograph that I took at an airplane museum. And that's another huge thing too, learning how to render objects, is having a lot of photo reference that you can use. And don't ever think that's cheating. I think when I was doing design work and artwork and things like that, I always thought using photo reference was kind of a cheat. But if you study some of the best artists out there, they use photo reference. Even the great masters, when they would do the paintings, they would sit at a place and actually paint the object or paint the scenery or whatever they were doing, just because they didn't have cameras back then, but they were actually using the live objects to use as reference and to learn from. And I think it's highly important that you study the things that you want to draw. I have a huge fascination with World War II aircraft, so I have lots of pictures. I get a lot of stuff online. I know that I've found a lot of neat reference online from people that their grandfathers or their dads took actual pictures during World War II, that you can actually see the airplane as it was back in the day, which I'm totally fascinated by just because of the story behind it and everything. So here I'm starting to put in just a few detail lines, adding some rivets in there as well. I'm using that plane down there to kind of look and see how the rivets look and the metal texture, and even the way the paint looks on there. But you can even look at the lighting on that plane too and see how it has a really bright hot spot coming down from it. Obviously that has a lot to do with where it was sitting, but you can see that it kind of has a dark background where the hangar is, and then the canopy is actually reflecting a lot of light. It's getting it from the ceiling, or from the vents inside the airplane hangar. So here I'm also using the reference to kind of look at the those red and black stripes on the back of the plane there, and I'm creating kind of a similar element to it. And also I created that red patch below. I'd seen that on another plane, and I just decided to put that in. Now here, I was trying a warp tool to see if I could get it to bend with the body. So you saw how I drew the graphics straight on there. Well, now I'm taking it and I'm making it bend around that curve, because the graphics would actually follow that shape. They wouldn't go straight through. It'd be just because there's also slight perspective to the side view. That actually brings up another good point too. When you're drawing side views, always you can see all four of my wheels still in this side view. You always have a slight perspective to a side view, which makes the side view not be so dull, is how to explain it, or not, the I've seen a lot of people, they'll draw a side view of a car, and they'll just draw the two wheels facing them, dead on, with a perfect circle, and not show the wheels behind it. And like I said, it makes the drawing look really dead. And even when you draw side view too, I like to have the showing like the stuff underneath the car hanging down a little bit, and even putting in some black to kind of give some depth underneath the car as well. But anyways, going back to the wheels, you always offset them in the background a little bit from each other, and you tend to offset them both going in a little bit, because I'm adding just a slight perspective to the vehicle, so that it adds weight to the other side as well. So when you draw a side view of a car and you draw just those wheels that are straight on, and you don't have any offset of the wheels on the other side, it just looks really dead, and it looks flat. It also flattens the object a lot. So like I said, a big key to that is offsetting your wheels and then adding detail underneath the car of like things hanging down and components. Here I took a watercolor brush that I had, and I'm kind of roughing up the paint just a little bit, make it look a little weathered, probably a little more weathered than that airplane is. But if it's out racing in the salt flats, it's going to be getting hit by weather, it's going to be getting hit by the salt, and that salt actually is pretty destructive to cars and any type of vehicle. So it'll when you're going at that speed, it'll actually kind of like a sandpaper, it'll take off paint really quick. So now I've made it to the wheels, and just using that same method that I used to create the wheel, I just made the big circle, using the hard brush, just made a big yellow circle. Now these wheels are going to be a little different than my model, just experimenting, and also just keeping it real simple to show how this stuff works. So to add a little dish to the wheels, I put in a little bit of a shadow in there, as you can see. Now, just adding some depth to the wheels, as far as like, I kind of want it to look a little bit like an F1 car style wheel, where the knockoff is in the center, and it's kind of like an anodized look to it. So I made a hollow center, and then I did make those holes on the outside are kind of just more of a detail thing to the rim, just to give it some interest. Here, just to add a lip to the wheel, I copied and pasted the yellow rim and pasted it on a layer just under it, so you can see how it highlighted the top of the wheel, just to give it some depth. So here I just keep going a circle within a circle, and then just to kind of give the wheel some detail. You know, you don't want it to be just a solid dish unless you're making a moon style wheel. I want it to have some interest to it. So there's where I make the hole in the center, kind of like an F1 style knockoff. So I'm using, you know, some modern day technology along with old school technology. Makes it a really interesting vehicle that way. You want it to perform more like a modern day race car than you want it to perform like an old day race car, I guess. That have some of the nostalgic look of the old 30s and 40s, 50s, you know, kind of Bonneville Salt Flat stuff. There I just put a rim, a stripe around the rim. And I did that with creating a path, and then I stroke the path with a brush. I make a thin brush, and then I stroke the path. So here I am. I'm going to the engine now and adding in some detail, getting the form a little bit better, making it look a little more like an engine instead of just a red thing sitting back there. So doing some shape, giving some shape to the valve cover. That's another important thing too. When you draw mechanical stuff, is really start to learn how things operate and how they need to look. Maybe they're not exactly, you know, like an engine is, but you know, anybody can look at that and realize, oh, that's an engine. It might have a few, you know, differences, but to know how things operate mechanically is a huge benefit to a designer. So here I am. I kind of skipped forward a little bit. I added some titanium looking pipes to it. You can see how I finished the form. I kind of left the block really dark. I don't need to show any detail behind there anyways. Everyone gets that it's an engine. So now I'm going to go in and snazzy up these wheels a little bit more. Just give them a more realistic appearance, adding some highlights. Right here I'm using the color dodge tool to really brighten up that yellow a little bit and give it kind of a metallic look. So again, hitting the top of that wheel where a highlight would hit. Then coming down here, the bottom where the sun is kind of shining straight down on it. Now when you do highlights on a wheel, that's another big important thing, is you can see how the highlights kind of line up from top to bottom. When you put highlights, actually most of the time on any type of object, you want them to line up. And what that represents is that, you know, it's coming from one light source instead of several. Especially when you're showing the design of an object. Now if you're doing like a painting or an art piece, it's a little different because it's you know, you can use variable light sources to really highlight areas and get some different color variations. But when you do design work, you tend to want to have one light source to really show off the surfaces and the design, so you're not making it too complicated for, you know, say if a 3D modeler was going to do it, or even yourself, it's easier to explain. So here I'm just adding highlights to the wheel, popping out a few things. You can see this is kind of the anodized looking knockoff, the front and the back wheel. And when you use color dodge on other colors like that, it really gives an anodized type look to it. It's pretty cool. It's kind of one of my favorite parts of the rendering, is I love taking the color dodge tool and start to add some of the details and the hot spots. And it's amazing how it comes to life when you get to that point of adding in the color dodge tool, because you start adding highlights to the edges and things like that, and it really starts to bring the object to life and has an appearance of really existing in the real world. Here that scoop was looking a little dead, so I just added a slight horizon line to it to just kind of define it a little bit more, make it look like it's the rest, you know, that it fits in that picture with the rest of the car. So this is almost done. Coming to a conclusion here real soon. Oh, this is another great tool that I like to use, and I use this in my finishing when I'm finishing up stuff. And what it is, it's the line tool in Photoshop. And like I was talking about, you know, with making hard edges for a man-made object. Basically, what you can do with this tool is you select it to just be the color, whatever color you've selected down there. And right now I've kind of got a really, not a black, but it's kind of like a dark gray. And I'm just going over the different areas of the bottom of the car to really straighten up a few edges that I had, you know, that needed to be cleaned up from my rendering. So I go along here, and I'm also kind of adding a darker outline to around the whole car. But this is a great tool to use to kind of finish your line work at the very end. And pretty much that rendering's to the point now where I don't even need the sketch anymore. It's pretty much so well defined that I could pretty much erase it. I think I ended up leaving it just because it adds a little more texture. And I do like my drawings to have a lot of texture to it. Like I said, it goes back to that whole hand rendering thing again. So just tidying up a few lines, I go into my sketch here and I erase a few of the jagged edges. Like, I like my stuff to have a texture, but you know, you don't want it to look sloppy either. So I go in here and clean up a few of the edges. And I didn't like the way that edge was on that scoop on the back side. So I go in there and tidy that up a little bit, as you can see. But this is pretty close here. And then, if you guys are interested, I have the Photoshop file on the DVD itself, so you guys can go in there and kind of inspect it and look at it and see how I worked. The other thing I tend to do too is I flatten a lot of my layers as I go along, so I don't have as many layers as you might like to see. I like to keep it clean. I don't like a ton of layers. And so here I'm kind of experimenting. That piece on the side of the vehicle, it might look weird, but part of the feeling behind it was sort of like I said, using old airplane parts. Like, it was a piece that was on the airplane, and they didn't quite know how to get rid of it, so they kind of left it on. And I was even thinking it could be used as kind of a cooler or something in there, you know, like a box that holds some type of engine part that might still be used, but it's kind of a piece of the plane that was left on there. So just adding the highlights in there, kind of as if, you know, that was all punched out. It's catching the light. Rivets around it as if the plate could be taken off or something like that, you know, so you could get to the oil cooler. These are scenarios that are really good to come up with because it helps you define the objects on the car and make sense of stuff. You know, like I said, this was just kind of I wanted it to look like it was a piece that was, you know, off of a plane, and it still had this structure kind of left on it. But it's also worked into the design as well. So just getting the highlight on there, make it look like it's coming off the body. Rearranging some of the layers. You can see how many layers I have there. I end up grouping up quite a few towards the end here. And the other reason I group up all the layers as well is that when you use the color dodge tool, you want all the stuff to be together, or else the color won't build up right on it and it'll look really funky. You want it to affect all of the color of object that you're rendering over. And the other thing too, like I said, it just keeps your file nice and clean, and I don't want to have too many layers because then you go through and look for the stuff. It's kind of a pain. Especially, I also work like that too when I'm doing more of a sketch rendering like this is. Now, if I do like a really tight rendering like for a packaging illustration, I do tend to use a lot of layers because sometimes I need to go back and edit things to make it look really crisp. So just adding the final highlights here. And like I said, you're welcome to open up the Photoshop file and look at it. It's in high res, so um, enjoy it. And I hope you guys learned some stuff from the side view rendering. And we're going to be moving on to the 3/4 rendering next. Thanks for your time.